Even your wolf knows it's worthless, just like you." The words hit Lyra like stones thrown at glass, each syllable designed to shatter what little remained of her pride. She felt them settle into the familiar hollow space in her chest where hope used to live before she learned better. Beta Marcus stood over her as she knelt on the arena's stone floor, scrubbing blood from yesterday's challenges while the morning sun cast long shadows across the fighting ground. "Look at me when I'm speaking to you," Marcus commanded, his voice carrying the authority that came with rank, with respect, with everything Lyra would never possess. She raised her head slowly, keeping her grey eyes downcast in the practiced gesture of submission that had kept her alive for 22 years. Marcus's wolf prowled just beneath his skin, radiating the kind of dominance that made lesser wolves whimper and crawl. Every instinct screamed at her to drop lower, to make herself smaller, to disappear entirely. But her wolf had other ideas. Deep in her chest, something silver and fierce stretched like a cat waking from a long sleep. Her wolf raised its head inside her spirit, meeting Marcus's challenge with calm, steady defiance that sent ice through Lyra's veins. She felt her spine straighten without permission, felt her chin lift in a gesture that had gotten her into trouble more times than she could count. "There it is," Marcus said with cold satisfaction. "That arrogance that makes you think you're something special. Your wolf refuses to show proper respect to its betters." Around them, other servants paused in their work to watch. Lyra could feel their eyes on her, like weight pressing down, could hear the whispered prayers that it wouldn't be them next. She tried to force her wolf down, tried to summon the submission that would end this confrontation before it escalated. But her wolf sat like a queen in her mind, silver fur gleaming with an inner light that had no business belonging to someone like her. "I'm sorry, Beta Marcus," Lyra whispered, the words tasting like ash. "I don't mean any disrespect." "Don't you?" He circled her now, his boots clicking against stone with each measured step. "Then explain why your wolf won't bow. Explain why it stares at pack members like it has the right to judge them." She had no explanation. For as long as she could remember, her wolf had been wrong somehow. Other servants' wolves would flatten themselves against the ground when higher-ranking pack members approached, trembling with the need to appease their superiors. But hers would sit calmly, watching with those strange golden eyes that seemed too bright, too knowing, too proud for someone who cleaned blood from arena floors and slept in the servants' quarters. "Maybe it's because your bloodline is as tainted as the rest of you," Marcus continued, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than his shouts. "Maybe that's why you don't shift properly, why your wolf looks wrong, why you don't belong anywhere in this pack." The other servants had stopped pretending to work now. They watched with the hungry attention of people who found relief in someone else's suffering, grateful that the predator had chosen different prey. Lyra felt their stares like needles against her skin, but her wolf remained utterly calm, utterly unmoved by the threat and humiliation. That was the problem. Her wolf should have been cowering by now, should have been whimpering for mercy, rolling over to expose its throat in ultimate submission. Instead, it sat in her mind like it was holding court, like Marcus was a petitioner seeking audience rather than a beta exercising his rightful authority over a worthless servant. "Stand up," Marcus ordered. Lyra rose to her feet, muscles protesting after hours spent scrubbing stone. She was tall for a woman, which was another mark against her. Tall women were supposed to be strong, supposed to be valuable warriors or fertile mates. Tall women weren't supposed to clean floors and empty waste buckets and pretend they didn't exist. "Shift," Marcus commanded. This was always the worst part. Lyra closed her eyes and reached for the familiar pain of transformation, feeling her bones begin to crack and reform. The change hurt more than it should have, took longer than it should have, because something in her fought the process every time. But eventually her wolf emerged, silver-grey fur gleaming in the morning light. She was smaller than she should be for her human height, another mark of wrongness that the pack noticed and remarked upon. But what drew gasps from the watching servants wasn't her size. It was the way she stood. Her wolf planted all four paws firmly on the stone floor and lifted its head to look directly at Marcus. Not down at his feet, not away in shame, but straight into his eyes with a steady, measuring gaze that spoke of judgments being made and found lacking. Around them, the servants' own wolves whimpered in sympathetic terror at such brazen defiance. "You see," Marcus's voice was tight with fury now, "it doesn't know its place. It thinks it has the right to challenge me." He called his own wolf forward, letting the massive brown beast emerge to tower over Lyra's smaller form. The beta's wolf was everything a pack wolf should be. Large, powerful, radiating dominance that made the air itself feel heavy. It snarled down at her, showing teeth that could easily tear out her throat. Her wolf looked up at it with polite interest, like a scholar examining a particularly curious specimen. The beta's wolf snapped its jaws inches from her muzzle, a warning that should have sent her rolling onto her back in terror. Instead, her wolf tilted its head slightly, as if considering whether the threat was worth acknowledging, then looked away with the kind of dismissive boredom usually reserved for mildly annoying insects. The sound that came from Marcus's throat was barely human. His wolf lunged forward, intending to force the submission that should have been automatic. But before he could make contact, Elder Morgana's voice cut across the arena like a blade. "Enough." The old woman approached with slow, measured steps that somehow commanded more attention than Marcus's shouting. She was ancient even by pack standards, her hair white as moonlight and her eyes holding depths that spoke of secrets older than the stones beneath their feet. Her wolf had been laid to rest decades ago, but her authority came from something deeper than supernatural dominance. Marcus's wolf backed down immediately, shifting back to human form with obvious reluctance. "Elder Morgana, this servant's wolf refuses to show proper respect. It needs to be taught its place." "Does it?" Elder Morgana approached Lyra's still-standing wolf with careful steps. "How interesting." She studied the silver-grey wolf with eyes that seemed to see more than they should, her gaze lingering on details that made her frown in what might have been recognition or confusion. Lyra's wolf met that ancient stare without flinching, and for just a moment something passed between them, a flicker of understanding that made the elder's breath catch. "Shift back, child," Morgana said softly. Lyra obeyed, the transformation back to human form, leaving her naked and vulnerable under the watching eyes. Someone threw a rough cloth over her shoulders, but she barely noticed. She was watching Elder Morgana's face, trying to understand the strange expression that had settled there. "Your wolf is unusual," the elder said finally, "but perhaps that is not always a curse." Before anyone could ask what she meant, horns sounded from the watchtowers, 3 long blasts that made every person in the arena freeze with recognition and terror. The Alpha King was coming. Marcus straightened immediately, his earlier fury forgotten in the face of protocol and political opportunity. "All servants to the preparation quarters, now, and you." He pointed at Lyra with barely concealed disgust. "Stay out of sight. The Alpha King doesn't need to see our failures." As the servants scattered to make ready for their unexpected royal visitor, Elder Morgana lingered. She placed one weathered hand on Lyra's shoulder, her touch carrying warmth and something that might have been promise. "Some wolves," she said quietly, her words meant for Lyra alone, "refuse to bow because they were born to rule." Then she was gone, leaving Lyra standing in the emptying arena with her wolf's proud defiance still echoing in her bones, and 3 words that changed everything hanging in the air between them. Born to rule. The very idea should have been laughable. She was nobody, nothing, a servant whose wolf couldn't even submit properly. But as she hurried toward the servants' quarters, with her heart pounding against her ribs, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. something that would make all of Marcus's cruelty and the pack's dismissal seem like preparation for a moment that was racing toward her on the wind. Her wolf stretched again in her mind, no longer sleepy but alert, waiting. The Alpha King was coming, and for reasons she couldn't name, Lyra knew that nothing would ever be the same. The weight of a crown she had never worn pressed down on Lyra's shoulders as she stood in the royal chamber that had been hastily prepared for her. Through the window she could see pack members moving through the compound with a deference that made her stomach clench. Yesterday she had been invisible. Today they bowed when she passed, their eyes filled with awe and fear in equal measure. "This isn't real," she whispered to her reflection in the polished glass, but the silver marks glowing faintly on her skin said otherwise. Princess Lyra stared back at her, royal sigils proclaiming a birthright she had no idea how to claim. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, turning to find Thane entering with that fluid grace that spoke of predators who had never known defeat. Even in human form, his presence filled the room with supernatural authority that made her wolf purr with contentment. "How are you managing?" he asked, his winter storm eyes studying her with the intensity that had become familiar and comforting. "I don't know how to be a princess," she admitted, the words spilling out like water through a broken dam. "This morning I was scrubbing floors and hiding from attention. Now people bow to me and call me Your Highness, and I don't know what I'm supposed to do with any of it." Thane closed the distance between them, his hands settling on her shoulders with gentle strength. "You don't have to become someone else," he said quietly. The girl who cleaned floors with dignity, who endured cruelty without breaking, who had the courage to face sacred fire to discover the truth, she was always Princess Lyra. The only thing that changed was everyone else finally seeing what was always there. The mate bond hummed between them, golden warmth that pushed back the overwhelming uncertainty. Her wolf stretched in contentment, no longer restless but settled in a way it had never been before. "But I don't know anything about ruling," she said, leaning into his strength. "I don't know politics or diplomacy or how to make the kinds of decisions that affect entire kingdoms. What if I fail? What if I disappoint everyone who's counting on me?" "Then we'll figure it out together," Thane replied, his voice carrying absolute certainty. "That's what mates do. They face the impossible side by side and make it work through sheer stubborn will." Before she could respond, urgent voices echoed from the corridor outside. Through the window she saw riders approaching at breakneck speed, their horses lathered with sweat and their faces tight with the kind of urgency that spoke of disaster racing toward them on swift wings. "News from the border territories," Thane said grimly, his supernatural hearing picking up fragments of shouted reports, "and it's not good." They hurried to the great hall where the riders were delivering their message to Elder Morgana and the pack's leadership. The lead scout, a young woman with exhaustion written in every line of her body, turned as they entered. "Alpha King," she said, dropping to one knee despite her obvious fatigue. "Princess, we bring word from the eastern settlements. Lord Malakar's forces are mobilizing. Shadow wolves have been seen massing near the Old Kingdom's borders, and refugees are fleeing westward with stories of dark magic rising again." The news hit Lyra like a physical blow. She had known this moment would come, had understood that her awakening would draw Malakar's attention like blood drew sharks. But knowing and experiencing were different things entirely. "How long do we have?" Thane asked, his voice carrying the deadly calm that preceded storms. "Days, perhaps a week at most," the scout replied. "He's moving faster than anyone expected, as if he's been preparing for this moment for years." "He has been," Elder Morgana said quietly, her ancient voice heavy with regret. Malakar never stopped believing that somewhere in the world a silver wolf child had survived his purge. He spent 23 years planning for the day Princess Lyra would emerge. The great hall erupted in nervous conversation as pack members absorbed the implications. War was coming to their doorstep, brought by the girl they had dismissed as worthless for most of her life. "This is my fault," Lyra said, her voice barely above a whisper. "My presence here has put everyone in danger. Maybe I should leave, draw him away from innocent people." "No." Thane's voice cut through her self-recrimination like a blade. "You will not run from your birthright because a tyrant threatens violence. You will not abandon your people because standing up to evil comes with risks." "But I'm not ready," she protested, fear making her voice crack. "I don't know how to fight someone like Malakar. I don't know how to protect anyone." "Then we'll teach you," said a new voice from the hall's entrance. Cassandra stepped forward, her golden hair catching the torchlight and her expression serious in a way Lyra had never seen before. Gone was the malicious beauty who had threatened her in the sacred circle. In its place stood someone who radiated competence and determination. "You're offering to help me?" Lyra asked, unable to keep the suspicion from her voice. Cassandra's smile was wry but genuine. "I'm offering to serve my princess," she corrected. "I spent years resenting you because I thought you were pretending to be something you weren't. Now I know you were something far greater than any of us imagined. If Lord Malakar thinks he can finish what he started 23 years ago, he'll discover that House Silvermoon's daughter doesn't stand alone." Other voices rose in agreement throughout the hall. Pack members who had ignored her existence for years stepped forward to pledge their support, their wolves recognizing the royal authority that blazed from her like silver fire. "Your Highness," Beta Marcus said, and the title carried respect that had been absent from his voice for 22 years. "Command us, tell us how to prepare for the coming battle." The expectation in their voices, the trust in their eyes, threatened to overwhelm her completely. These people were looking to her for leadership she didn't know how to provide, counting on her to save them from an enemy she barely understood. But her wolf rose in her mind, silver and proud and blazing with inherited power. In its golden eyes she saw echoes of parents who had ruled with wisdom and courage, who had faced impossible odds to protect their people. She was their daughter. Their blood sang in her veins, their strength lived in her bones, their love had protected her through 23 years of hiding and waiting. "We prepare for war," she said, her voice carrying across the hall with royal authority that surprised even her. "We gather our allies, strengthen our defences, and remind Lord Malakar why House Silvermoon was feared and respected throughout the Eastern Territories." Cheers erupted from the assembled pack, voices raised in determination and defiance. As plans began forming and preparations commenced, Thane stepped close enough that only she could hear his next words. "There's my queen," he said with fierce pride, "ready to claim her birthright and defend her people." The mate bond blazed between them, golden fire that burned away doubt and fear. Whatever came next, whatever darkness Malakar brought with him, she would face it as her parents' daughter, as Princess Lyra of House Silvermoon, as a silver wolf who had finally learned that she was never meant to bow to anyone. The attack came in the darkest hour before dawn, when even the most vigilant guards fought against the pull of sleep. Lyra woke to the sound of her wolf's snarling warnings in her mind, supernatural senses screaming danger with an urgency that sent ice through her veins. She rolled from her bed as the first explosion shattered the night, dark magic tearing through the pack's outer defences like claws through silk. "Lyra!" Thane's voice roared through the chaos as he burst through her chamber door, already half-shifted with his wolf's golden eyes blazing in the darkness. "Malakar's forces, they've broken through the eastern perimeter." She was moving before conscious thought took hold, her body responding to training that Cassandra and the pack's warriors had drilled into her over the past 3 days. The royal sigils on her skin blazed with silver light as adrenaline flooded her system, ancient power responding to mortal danger with fierce readiness. "How many?" she asked, pulling on the leather armour that had been crafted specifically for her royal wolf form. "Too many," Thane replied grimly, his supernatural hearing tracking the battle raging outside. Shadow wolves, dark mages, and something else, something that feels wrong, like twisted magic given flesh and teeth. Through her window, Lyra could see silver light clashing with unnatural darkness as the pack's defenders fought desperately to hold the compound's inner walls. But even as she watched, sections of their carefully prepared defences crumbled under assault from creatures that moved like nightmares made manifest. "They're after you specifically," Thane continued, his protective instincts blazing as golden fire in the mate bond. "This isn't a conquest, it's an assassination." The knowledge should have terrified her, should have sent her fleeing toward whatever escape routes had been prepared. Instead, her wolf rose to its feet in her mind with regal fury that made her skin burn with silver radiance. "Then let's give them what they came for," she said, her voice carrying royal authority that surprised them both. They burst from the building into a compound, transformed into a war zone. Shadow wolves moved like liquid darkness between the buildings, their forms seeming to absorb light itself as they cut down defenders with claws that dripped with unnatural poison. Dark mages hurled spells that turned the very air toxic, while creatures that looked like wolves crossed with living nightmares prowled through the chaos with intelligence that spoke of twisted experimentation. "There," Cassandra's voice cut through the din as she pointed toward the sacred circle. "They're trying to corrupt the stones." A group of Malakar's dark mages had surrounded the ancient granite markers, their hands weaving spells that made the sacred symbols flicker and dim. If they succeeded in poisoning the stone's power, the pack would lose their greatest supernatural defense. "Not while I breathe," Lyra snarled and let her wolf explode to the surface. The transformation was unlike anything she had ever experienced. Power flowed through her bones like molten silver, royal magic that had been locked away for 23 years, finally free to express its true nature. The wolf that emerged was magnificent, larger than any pack wolf had a right to be, with fur that gleamed like captured starlight and eyes that burned with golden fire. She bounded across the compound with Thane's massive black wolf at her side, their combined presence sending waves of supernatural authority that made both friend and foe pause in recognition. When they reached the sacred circle, the dark mages looked up with expressions of triumph and hunger that made her blood boil with inherited rage. "The lost princess," one of them hissed, his voice carrying the corruption of decades spent practicing forbidden magic. "Lord Malakar will be so pleased when we bring him your head." Her response was a sound that no pack-wolf should have been able to make, a roar that combined wolfish fury with something deeper, something that spoke of ancient bloodlines and royal power that predated human civilization. The sacred stones blazed to life around her, their silver light pushing back the darkness as her presence awakened their true potential. The battle that followed was unlike anything the pack had ever witnessed. Lyra moved through Malakar's forces like vengeance given form, silver light erupting from her claws and fangs as royal magic flowed through her attacks. Where she struck, shadow wolves dissolved into nothingness, their artificial darkness unable to stand against the purity of silver wolf power. Beside her, Thane fought with the deadly precision of a king who had never known defeat, his black wolf moving in perfect harmony with her silver radiance. Together they carved through the enemy ranks, their mate bond allowing them to fight as two parts of a single devastating whole. But it was when the real horror emerged that Lyra's true power finally manifested. From the compound's eastern edge came a creature that made the shadow wolves look like house cats. 20 feet of twisted flesh and bone, with multiple heads that had once been wolves but had been warped by dark magic into something that should never have drawn breath. Its eyes burned with malevolent intelligence, and when it spoke, its voice carried the authority of nightmares made real. "Princess Lyrily," it rumbled, each word dripping with corruption. "Lord Malakar sends his regards and his promise that your death will be as slow and painful as your parents'." The mention of her mother and father ignited something in Lyra's chest that went beyond rage, beyond fury, into realms of wrath that belonged to the old powers that had shaped the world in its youth. Silver light exploded from her form, brighter than the sun at noon, as royal magic answered the call of a princess defending her birthright. She grew, not physically, but spiritually, her wolf's presence expanding until it filled the entire compound with silver radiance that burned away shadow and corruption with ruthless efficiency. The twisted creature howled in pain as her light touched it, dark magic unravelling under assault from power that had been blessed by forces older than kingdoms. When she struck, it was with claws wreathed in silver fire that cut through the creature's corrupted hide like it was made of smoke. Her fangs found its throat, and the bite that followed channeled 23 years of suppressed royal magic directly into the abomination's core. The explosion of silver light that resulted could be seen for miles, a pillar of pure power that announced to every supernatural creature in the territory that House Silvermoon had returned. When the light faded, the compound fell silent. Malakar's remaining forces had fled into the night, their dark magic no match for the royal power they had tried to destroy. The twisted creature was nothing but ash scattered on the wind, its corruption burned away by silver fire that left the very air cleaner in its wake. Lyra shifted back to human form in the centre of the sacred circle, her skin still glowing with residual power and her royal marks blazing like captured stars. Around her, the pack emerged from cover with expressions of awe and reverence that spoke to witnesses who had seen legend made manifest. "My queen," Thane said as he approached, his winter-storm eyes blazing with pride and love in equal measure. "You were magnificent." She looked around at the compound, at her people who had followed her into battle against impossible odds, at the sacred stones that hummed with renewed power, and finally understood what her parents had died to protect. Not just her life, but the hope that someday their daughter would reclaim her birthright and stand against the darkness that had consumed their kingdom. "This is only the beginning," she said, her voice carrying across the compound with royal authority that brooked no argument. Malakar wanted to finish what he started 23 years ago. Instead, he's reminded the world why House Silvermoon was feared and respected throughout the Eastern Territories. She looked toward the horizon, where dawn was beginning to break, silver light meeting gold in a display that seemed to echo the mate bond she shared with her king. Now it's time to remind him that silver wolves don't hide in shadows anymore. 3 months after the battle that had shaken the supernatural world, Princess Lyralee stood on the palace balcony overlooking territories that now bore both the Crescent Moon Pack's banner and the silver wolf sigil of House Silvermoon. The compound had been rebuilt, stronger than before, with walls that hummed with protective magic and sacred stones that blazed with renewed power. She was no longer the girl who had scrubbed floors and hidden from attention. The woman who stood watching the sunset wore authority like a second skin, her silver marks gleaming with the confidence of someone who had claimed her birthright through trial by fire and blood. The pack members below moved through their duties with the easy respect of people who served a leader they had chosen, rather than one imposed upon them. "Admiring your handiwork?" Thane's voice carried warm amusement as he joined her on the balcony, his presence filling the space with the comfortable authority of a mate and co-ruler. "Our handiwork," she corrected, leaning into his warmth as his arms encircled her from behind. "I couldn't have done any of this without you." The view spread before them told the story of their shared leadership, training grounds where pack warriors sparred under Cassandra's expert instruction, gardens where healers grew herbs that had been thought extinct since the Eastern Kingdoms fell, and workshops where craftsmen forged weapons capable of channeling silver wolf magic. "The Border Scouts report that Malakar's forces have withdrawn deeper into the Shadow Territories," Thane said, his breath warm against her ear. Your display of power 3 months ago convinced him that a direct assault won't succeed." "Good," Lyra replied, though her wolf remained alert to threats that might emerge from the darkness. "But he won't give up. Men like Malachar don't abandon 23 years of planning because of one defeat." "No," Thane agreed, his arms tightening around her. "But they do learn to fear opponents who prove stronger than expected. You've bought us time to prepare, to gather allies, to build the kind of coalition that can face whatever he sends next." Below them, children who had been born into the pack after her arrival played games that involved silver light and royal wolves, their laughter carrying up on the evening breeze. They would grow up in a world where House Silvermoon was legend made real, where a lost princess had returned to reclaim her birthright. "Do you ever miss it?" Thane asked quietly. "The simplicity of being invisible, of having no responsibilities beyond your own survival?" Lyra considered the question seriously, watching pack members who bowed respectfully when they caught sight of her on the balcony. There had been peace in invisibility, safety in being nobody that mattered to anyone. But there had also been emptiness, a hollow ache where belonging should have lived. "I miss not knowing that enemies wanted me dead," she said finally. "I miss sleeping without dreams of battles and bloodlines and responsibilities I'm still learning to carry, but I don't miss feeling worthless. I don't miss believing I was broken or defective or less than everyone around me." Her wolf stirred contentedly in her mind, no longer the restless, caged creature that had paced and whined for 22 years. In its place lived something regal and satisfied, a royal wolf that had finally found its proper place in the world. "When I stopped believing I was worthless," she continued, "I discovered I was worth everything my parents died to protect. Their sacrifice wasn't about keeping a servant girl alive. It was about preserving the hope that someday their daughter would reclaim what was stolen and restore what was lost." Thane's hand settled over her stomach, where new life had begun growing with the same silver light that marked her royal heritage. The discovery had come 2 weeks ago, confirmed by pack healers whose joy had been matched only by their reverence for the continuation of House Silvermoon's bloodline. "Our child will grow up knowing their worth," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "They'll never spend a day believing they're nobody, never wonder if they belong or if they deserve love and respect. They'll be raised by a pack that chose to follow rather than one that dismissed them as worthless," Lyra agreed, her own hand covering his. "They'll know from birth that they carry the blood of kings and queens, that their parents' love created something beautiful enough to change the fate of kingdoms." The sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and silver, colours that had become symbols of their united rule. In the distance she could see riders approaching with news from allied territories, reports from the network of contacts they had been building since her identity was revealed. "Princess Lyra Lee," Thane said with mock formality, turning her in his arms so she faced him directly. "Do you have any regrets about claiming your birthright? Any second thoughts about trading invisibility for a crown?" She looked into his winter storm eyes, seeing love and pride and fierce protectiveness that would never waver regardless of what challenges they faced. The mate bond hummed between them, golden threads of connection that had grown stronger with each passing day. "Ask me in 50 years," she said, standing on her toes to brush her lips against his. "When our children are grown and ruling territories of their own, when House Silvermoon has been fully restored, when the Eastern Kingdoms remember what it means to flourish under Silver Wolf protection? And if I ask you in 50 years? Then I'll tell you the same thing I'm telling you now," she replied, her voice carrying absolute certainty. "That every moment of fear, every drop of blood, every sleepless night spent planning for threats we can barely imagine, all of it was worth it to discover who I truly am." The kiss that followed tasted of promises and forever, of love that had been recognised by ancient magic and blessed by powers older than kingdoms. When they broke apart, the last light of sunset was fading into silver-touched darkness that no longer held any terror for her. "I love you," Thane said simply, the words carrying weight that made the mate bond flare with golden warmth. "I love you too," she replied, her hand still resting over the new life growing within her. "Both of you, all of us. This pack, this territory, this future we're building together." They stood together on the balcony as night fell over lands that bore their protection, two wolves who had found their mates and claimed their destiny despite impossible odds. In the distance, lights began flickering on throughout the compound, each one representing a life that had been touched by the return of House Silvermoon. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new threats, new responsibilities that came with ruling territories where both human and supernatural creatures sought safety and guidance. But tonight, Princess Lyralee stood beside her mate and felt the profound satisfaction of someone who had finally come home. Her wolf stretched in perfect contentment, no longer the broken creature that couldn't submit properly, but a royal beast that had never needed to bow to anyone but her equal. And in the silver light of early stars, she whispered words that carried on the evening breeze like a prayer and a promise. "I am Princess Lyralee of House Silvermoon. I am the daughter of King Aldrich and Queen Seraphina. I am the mate of Alpha King Thane, mother to the next generation of silver wolves, and protector of all who seek refuge under my banner." She paused, letting the truth of it settle into her bones like coming home. "I am no longer nobody. I never was." The stars blazed overhead like scattered diamonds, and in their light a lost princess who had finally found her crown smiled with the satisfaction of someone who had discovered that her worth had never depended on anyone else's recognition. It had always been there, waiting for her to be brave enough to claim it. The days that followed were a blur of frenzied preparation that transformed the entire pack compound into something Lyra barely recognized. News of the Alpha King's visit had spread through the territory like wildfire, carrying with it whispers of opportunity and terror in equal measure. King Thane wasn't simply making a social call. He was here to select warriors for his elite guard, an honour that would elevate chosen pack members to positions of power beyond their wildest dreams. Lyra tried to make herself invisible as she navigated the chaos, but invisibility had become impossible when every surface needed scrubbing, every banner needed hanging, and every ceremonial weapon needed polishing until it gleamed like starlight. The arena itself had been transformed into something magnificent and terrible, with ancient banners bearing the royal crest hanging from towering poles and seats arranged in precise hierarchy around the fighting ground. "Move faster, you worthless creature!" snapped Omega Sarah as she shoved past Lyra with an armload of silk cushions meant for the visiting dignitaries. "The Alpha King arrives at sunset, and if anything isn't perfect, Beta Marcus will have our hides." Lyra bent her head and quickened her pace, but her wolf stirred restlessly in her chest. The closer the Alpha King's arrival came, the more agitated her wolf became, pacing and whining in her mind like it was preparing for something. She tried to quiet the anxious energy, but it only grew stronger as she approached her assigned task, the sacred stones. They stood in a circle at the arena's heart, each one carved from black granite and inscribed with runes older than the pack's history. During ceremonial challenges, the stones amplified the spiritual connections between wolves, allowing spectators to feel echoes of the fighters' courage and strength. Today, they would help the Alpha King sense the true nature of those who sought to join his guard. Lyra approached them with cleaning supplies and the same careful respect she'd been taught to show all sacred things. But as she knelt beside the first stone and began polishing its surface, something extraordinary happened. The runes began to glow, not brightly, just a faint silver luminescence that pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat. She jerked her hand back, expecting pain or punishment for somehow triggering a reaction she had no right to cause. But the stones simply hummed with quiet power, as if they were greeting an old friend. Her wolf stopped pacing. For the first time in days, it settled into perfect stillness, watching through her eyes with intense focus as the ancient symbols continued their gentle pulsing. She reached out tentatively, placing her palm flat against the carved surface. The connection was immediate and overwhelming. Power flowed through the stone into her bones, ancient and vast and somehow familiar, like a song she'd forgotten but was finally remembering. Her wolf rose to its feet in her mind, lifting its muzzle as if scenting something on a wind that had been absent for too long. "What do you think you're doing?" The voice cut through her trance like cold water. Lyra spun to find Cassandra approaching, her perfect golden hair catching the afternoon light and her blue eyes blazing with fury. Behind her walked her wolf in physical form, a stunning golden creature that radiated confidence and breeding. Everything about Cassandra screamed of high rank, from her expensive clothes to the way she moved like the world existed for her pleasure. "I'm cleaning the stones as ordered, Lady Cassandra," Lyra said, dropping her gaze and trying to ignore the way the runes continued glowing beneath her hands. "Are you?" Cassandra's voice dripped with skepticism as she approached the circle. "Because it looks to me like you're playing with powers far beyond your understanding. Tell me, little servant, what makes you think you have the right to touch sacred stones meant for your betters?" Lyra opened her mouth to explain that she'd been assigned this task, that she was only following orders, but the words died when Cassandra's wolf stepped into the circle. The golden creature was magnificent, sleek and powerful, and everything a pack wolf should be. It approached the stones with the confidence of someone who belonged, who had every right to be there, and nothing happened. The runes remained dark and cold under the golden wolf's presence. No gentle humming, no silver light, no sense of ancient power recognizing ancient power. Cassandra's perfect wolf might as well have been a statue for all the reaction the sacred stones gave. Cassandra's eyes narrowed as she noticed the difference. "How interesting. The stones respond to you, but not to me." Her voice had gone dangerously soft. "Do you know what that suggests, little servant?" "That I've done something wrong," Lyra whispered, "because that was always the safest answer." "Oh no," Cassandra smiled, and the expression was sharp enough to cut. "It suggests that you're hiding something, something that makes you think you're special." She stepped closer, her wolf moving to flank Lyra's position. "Shall we test that theory?" Before Lyra could respond, Cassandra's wolf lunged forward in the challenge pose that demanded immediate submission. Its golden eyes blazed with dominance, its powerful body radiating the authority that came with high breeding and pack approval. The message was clear: bow down or face the consequences. Lyra's wolf rose to meet the challenge. Not physically, not yet, but spiritually, mentally, with a presence that filled the sacred circle like silver light made manifest. Her wolf stood in her mind with perfect calm, studying Cassandra's golden creature with the same polite interest it had shown Beta Marcus. Then it did something that made Lyra's heart stop. It looked directly into the golden wolf's eyes and held that gaze without flinching. The reaction was immediate. Cassandra's wolf stumbled backward as if struck, its confident dominance flickering like a candle in wind. Around them, the sacred stones pulsed brighter, their silver light reflecting off both wolves as ancient power recognized the confrontation taking place. "Impossible," Cassandra breathed, but her voice carried uncertainty now instead of authority. "You're nobody. You're nothing. You clean floors and empty chamber pots. You don't have the bloodline to challenge me." "I'm not challenging you," Lyra said quietly, and she meant it. She had no desire for confrontation, no wish to draw attention or make enemies. But her wolf had its own ideas about respect and dominance, and it refused to be cowed by golden fur and political connections. "Aren't you?" Cassandra's wolf began circling, looking for an angle of approach that would force submission. "Then explain why your mongrel wolf thinks it can meet my gaze. Explain why the sacred stones light up like festival lanterns when you touch them." Lyra had no explanations. She only knew that something in her blood sang when she touched the ancient granite, that her wolf felt more real and present in this circle than anywhere else, and that the power flowing through the stones seemed to recognize her as surely as she recognized it. "I don't know," she admitted, because honesty had always been her default when lies would only make things worse. "You don't know." Cassandra's laugh was like breaking glass. "How convenient. Well, let me enlighten you about what I know. I know that tomorrow the Alpha King will stand in this very circle and choose warriors based on their strength, their breeding, their worth to his cause. I know that I will be chosen because I am everything he needs in an elite guard member. And I know that you will watch from the shadows where you belong, invisible and forgotten as always." She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than her earlier shouts. "But if you ever try to upstage me again, if you ever let your broken wolf think it can challenge its betters, I will make sure you disappear permanently. There are hunting accidents in these woods, tragic mishaps that befall servants who forget their place." The threat hung in the air between them like poison, but Lyra's wolf remained unmoved. If anything, it seemed to grow more solid, more present, as if the sacred stones were feeding it power that had been locked away for too long. "Do we understand each other?" Cassandra demanded. "Yes, Lady Cassandra," Lyra whispered, because what else could she say? But even as she spoke the words of submission, her wolf sat like a queen in the circle of sacred stones, surrounded by silver light and ancient power, refusing to acknowledge any authority save its own mysterious truth. Cassandra stared at her for a long moment, clearly frustrated by the lack of proper cowering. Then she spun on her heel and stalked away, her golden wolf following with backward glances that promised future retribution. Alone again, Lyra sank to her knees beside the stones and tried to understand what had just happened. The runes still glowed faintly beneath her hands, still hummed with power that felt like home and danger and promise all wrapped together. Tomorrow, the Alpha King would stand in this circle and choose his warriors. Tomorrow, she would hide in the shadows and watch while her betters competed for honours she could never claim. But tonight, in the growing dusk with sacred stones singing silver songs around her, her wolf stretched and settled into perfect contentment, as if it knew something she didn't about what tomorrow would bring. The Alpha King arrived like a storm given flesh and will. Lyra felt him before she saw him, a pressure in the air that made her wolf leap to its feet in her mind and pace with sudden, inexplicable urgency. She was hidden behind the arena's maintenance equipment, tasked with staying invisible, while the pack's elite gathered to welcome their royal visitor. But invisibility had become impossible when every instinct screamed that something monumental was approaching. The sound came first, not footsteps, but the rhythmic thunder of a dozen horses carrying riders who moved like they owned the world. Then the horns, deep and resonant, announcing the arrival of the most powerful alpha in the known territories. The pack members in the arena straightened as one, their wolves responding to dominance they could feel pressing against their minds like a physical weight. When Alpha King Thane entered the arena, the very air seemed to bow before him. He was taller than any man had a right to be, with shoulders broad enough to carry kingdoms and eyes the colour of winter storms. Dark hair fell to his shoulders in waves that caught the torchlight, and when he moved, it was with the fluid grace of a predator who had never known defeat. But it wasn't his physical presence that made every person in the arena drop their gaze. It was the raw, overwhelming power that radiated from him like heat from a forge. His wolf prowled just beneath his skin, visible to anyone with the supernatural senses to perceive it. Massive and black as midnight, with eyes that glowed like molten gold, it was a creature of legend made manifest. Even contained within human form, its presence was so powerful that lesser wolves began whimpering and pressing themselves flat against the ground in desperate submission. Lyra tried to shrink further behind her hiding place, but her wolf had other ideas. Instead of cowering like every other wolf in the arena, hers rose to its feet in her mind and tilted its head with curious interest, as if a puzzle piece had finally clicked into place. "Welcome, Alpha King," Beta Marcus called out, his voice steady despite the supernatural pressure bearing down on him. "The Crescent Moon Pack is honoured by your presence." Thane's gaze swept the assembled crowd with calculating precision, taking in the carefully arranged hierarchy, the nervous energy, the desperate hope radiating from those who dreamed of joining his elite guard. When he spoke, his voice carried the kind of authority that could start wars or end them with equal ease. "I sense strong wolves among you," he said, and the words seemed to resonate in the bones of everyone present. "That is good. My guard requires warriors who can stand beside me in battle, who can face the darkness that threatens our territories without flinching." His wolf stirred restlessly, and the motion sent ripples of unease through the crowd. But then something extraordinary happened. The great black beast suddenly went completely still, its massive head turning with deliberate precision toward the maintenance area where Lyra was hidden. She pressed herself deeper into the shadows, but it was too late. Those golden eyes had found her, and the intensity of their focus made her breath catch in her throat. For a moment that stretched like eternity, predator and prey stared at each other across the arena, and Lyra felt something shift in the air between them. Recognition. Not of her face or her name or anything logical that could explain the sudden tension crackling through the space, but recognition of something deeper, something that made her wolf stop pacing and sit with perfect attention, ears pricked forward like it was listening to a sound only it could hear. Thane's nostrils flared slightly, and she knew with bone-deep certainty that he was scenting the air, following some trail that his wolf had detected. His human form remained perfectly controlled, but the supernatural pressure emanating from him intensified until several pack members stumbled under its weight. "Your Majesty," Beta Marcus ventured, clearly confused by the sudden change in the Alpha King's demeanour. Thane didn't answer immediately. Instead, he took a step forward, then another, moving with the deliberate precision of a hunter tracking wounded prey. His wolf pressed closer to the surface, and Lyra could see the moment when his carefully maintained human facade began to crack. She tried to retreat further, but there was nowhere to go. The maintenance area was enclosed on 3 sides, and the only escape route would take her directly into the open arena where hundreds of eyes would witness her humiliation. Her wolf, however, showed no interest in fleeing. If anything, it seemed to be pulling her forward, urging her toward a confrontation she couldn't possibly win. The Alpha King's wolf emerged without warning. One moment he was human, controlled and commanding. The next, a creature of shadow and starlight stood in the arena's centre, so massive that it dwarfed every other wolf Lyra had ever seen. Its black fur seemed to absorb light, creating the illusion that it was carved from living darkness, while its golden eyes blazed with intelligence and power that took her breath away. The reaction from the assembled pack was immediate and instinctive. Every wolf dropped to the ground in perfect submission, pressing their bellies to the stone and exposing their throats in the ultimate gesture of surrender. The sight was magnificent and terrible, a reminder of the natural order that placed the Alpha King at the apex of all supernatural hierarchy. Every wolf except one. Lyra's wolf pushed against her consciousness with sudden, overwhelming urgency. Before she could stop it, before she could even fully understand what was happening, her body began the familiar, painful process of transformation. Bones cracked and reformed, muscles stretched and contracted, and her vision exploded into the enhanced spectrum of supernatural sight. She emerged from behind the maintenance equipment on 4 legs, her silver-grey fur gleaming in the torchlight. She was smaller than she should have been, marked by the same wrongness that had plagued her all her life, but her wolf held its head high with unmistakable dignity. The Alpha King's massive black wolf turned to face her fully, and the air between them crackled with electricity. Around them, gasps and whispered prayers rose from the watching pack. This was impossible. This was madness. No wolf, especially not a servant's broken wolf, could stand upright in the presence of the Alpha King without immediately being crushed by his dominance. But Lyra's wolf not only stood, it began walking forward. Each step was deliberate, measured, carrying her across the arena floor toward the most powerful predator in the known world. The sacred stones began to glow as she passed them, their silver light reflecting off her fur and creating the illusion that she moved through starlight. The Alpha King's wolf watched her approach with perfect stillness, its golden eyes tracking every movement. When she was close enough to touch, close enough for him to end her life with a single snap of those massive jaws, she stopped. They stood facing each other in the center of the arena, shadow and silver, power and mystery. The watching pack held its collective breath as ancient forces stirred in the space between them. Then the Alpha King's wolf did something that made several spectators cry out in shock and disbelief. It lowered its massive head in acknowledgement, not submission. Kings did not submit, but recognition of something that demanded respect, something that his wolf understood, even if his human mind struggled to accept it. Lyra's wolf stepped forward and touched her muzzle to his, a gesture of greeting between equals that sent shockwaves through every supernatural sense in the arena. Power flowed between them, silver light meeting golden fire, and for one impossible moment the air itself seemed to sing with harmony. When they separated, the Alpha King's wolf studied her with eyes that held depths she couldn't fathom. She had the strangest feeling that he was asking a question, waiting for an answer that she didn't know how to give. Her wolf sat back on its haunches with perfect composure, meeting that ancient gaze without flinching. Around them, the sacred stones pulsed with increasingly bright silver light, as if they were celebrating something long awaited finally coming to pass. The Alpha King shifted back to human form with fluid grace, his winter storm eyes never leaving Lyra's wolf. When he spoke, his voice carried wonder and something that might have been recognition. "What are you?" The question hung in the air like a prayer waiting for an answer. Lyra's wolf tilted its head, and she had the unsettling sensation that it knew exactly what it was, even if she didn't. Before she could shift back to human form and attempt to explain the inexplicable, movement at the arena's edge caught her attention. Pack members were pointing and whispering, their faces reflecting confusion, fear, and barely contained excitement. The impossible had happened in their arena. Their Alpha King's wolf had acknowledged a servant's broken wolf as something worthy of respect, and everyone present knew that nothing would ever be the same. The ceremony began at dawn, with rituals older than memory. Lyra had spent the night hidden in the servants' quarters, trying to process what had happened in the arena, while her wolf paced restlessly in her mind. Sleep had been impossible with the memory of golden eyes and that impossible moment of recognition burning in her thoughts. Now, as the pack gathered for the formal selection ceremony, she pressed herself into the shadows at the arena's edge and prayed to remain invisible. The sacred stones had been arranged in a perfect circle at the arena's heart, their ancient surfaces gleaming with morning light. Pack members filed into seats according to strict hierarchy, with the most powerful claiming positions closest to the ceremonial ground. At the highest point, a throne had been erected for Alpha King Thane, carved from black granite and draped with the royal crest. "Let all wolves hear and understand," Elder Morgana called out, her voice carrying across the arena with ceremonial authority. "Today we honour the old ways. Today we demonstrate the strength and submission that binds our pack together under the natural order." Lyra felt her stomach clench as the elder continued explaining the ancient protocol. Each wolf would enter the sacred circle and display their power, their breeding, their worthiness to serve in the Alpha King's guard. But before any demonstration could begin, they must first show proper submission to the ultimate authority. They must bow before the Alpha King's wolf. "The ceremony requires absolute adherence to protocol," Elder Morgana announced. Any wolf that fails to show appropriate submission will be removed from consideration and face pack discipline for disrespect to our honoured guest." Around the arena, the assembled pack members shifted nervously. This was their chance for elevation, for honour, for everything their wolves craved. No one would risk it by failing to demonstrate perfect submission. Alpha King Thane rose from his throne, and the morning air grew heavy with supernatural pressure. When he shifted, his massive black wolf emerged with fluid grace, positioning itself at the circle's centre. Golden eyes swept the crowd with regal authority, and every wolf present felt the weight of that ancient gaze. "Let the ceremony begin," Beta Marcus announced. The first candidates approached the sacred circle with careful reverence. Young warriors, seasoned fighters, wolves whose bloodlines trace back generations in the pack's history. One by one, they entered the sacred space and prostrated themselves before the Alpha King's wolf, pressing their bellies to the stone and exposing their throats in ultimate surrender. Each display of submission was met with a brief acknowledgement from the black wolf before the candidate was permitted to demonstrate their combat skills or special abilities. The process was beautiful and terrible, a reminder of the natural order that governed their world. Lyra watched from the shadows, fascinated despite herself by the ancient ritual unfolding before her. Her wolf had grown increasingly agitated as the ceremony progressed, pacing and whining in her mind like it was preparing for something she couldn't understand. "Next," Beta Marcus called. Cassandra glided into the circle with the confidence of someone who had never doubted her place in the world. Her golden hair caught the morning light like spun silk, and her wolf emerged with practiced elegance. The golden creature was magnificent, radiating the kind of breeding and power that made spectators sigh with appreciation. She approached the Alpha King's wolf with fluid grace, lowering herself into perfect submission. Her golden wolf pressed itself flat against the sacred stones, throat exposed, every line of its body speaking of respect and surrender. The display was flawless, exactly what protocol demanded. The Alpha King's wolf acknowledged her briefly, then stepped back to allow her demonstration. Cassandra's combat skills were impressive, her wolf form moving with lethal precision as she performed the ritualized challenges that proved her worthiness. "Excellent," Elder Morgana murmured, and the crowd murmured agreement. But as Cassandra prepared to leave the circle, her golden wolf's gaze found Lyra in the shadows. For just a moment, those blue eyes blazed with triumph and malicious satisfaction. The message was clear. "This is how it's done, servant." This is what real wolves look like. More candidates followed, each performing the same ritual of submission before displaying their abilities. The Alpha King's wolf remained impassive, occasionally nodding approval, but showing no particular interest in any of the demonstrations, until something went wrong. A young warrior named Derek had just completed his submission display when the crowd began shifting restlessly. Whispered conversations broke out despite the ceremonial solemnity, and several pack members were pointing toward the shadows where servants waited. Lyra felt a chill of recognition as she realized what was happening. The crowd was pushing forward, pressing against the barriers that separated spectators from the sacred circle. Someone stumbled, someone else was shoved, and suddenly the careful organization of the ceremony began to collapse into chaos. "Order!" Beta Marcus shouted, but his voice was lost in the growing commotion. A servant girl beside Lyra was pushed forward by the crowd's momentum, stumbling toward the ceremonial space with terror written across her face. Pack members behind her continued pressing forward, seeking better views of the selection process, and the careful boundaries began to blur. Lyra found herself caught in the surge of bodies, pushed inexorably toward the one place she absolutely could not go. She fought against the crowd's movement, trying to retreat back into the shadows, but there were too many people and not enough space. Her wolf suddenly stopped pacing. In her mind, the silver-grey creature sat with perfect composure, watching through her eyes as the sacred circle grew closer. There was no fear in its posture, no concern about the approaching catastrophe. If anything, her wolf seemed to be waiting for this moment. "No!" Lyra whispered, trying to force her way backward through the crowd. "Not now! Not here!" But the press of bodies was too strong, and her feet betrayed her on the smooth stone. She stumbled forward, arms windmilling as she tried to regain her balance, and stepped directly into the sacred circle. The arena fell silent. Every voice, every whisper, every breath seemed to stop as hundreds of eyes focused on the servant who had violated the most sacred space in their territory. Lyra stood frozen at the circle's edge, acutely aware of the Alpha King's massive black wolf watching her with those penetrating golden eyes. "Remove her immediately," Beta Marcus commanded, his voice tight with fury and embarrassment. But before anyone could move, Lyra's wolf made its decision. The transformation began without her permission, bones cracking and reforming as her wolf pushed its way to the surface. She tried to fight the change, tried to force her wolf to submit and retreat, but it was useless. Her silver-grey wolf emerged in the sacred circle, standing tall despite the horrified gasps echoing around the arena. "Impossible," someone whispered. Protocol demanded immediate submission. Every instinct, every law, every tradition of their people required her wolf to throw itself down before the Alpha King's superior authority. The black wolf was watching her with intense focus, waiting for the display of surrender that must come. Her wolf lifted its head and looked directly into those ancient golden eyes. The arena held its breath as the two wolves faced each other across the sacred stones. Power crackled in the air between them, supernatural recognition blazing like wildfire through the ceremonial space. The sacred stones began to glow with silver light, responding to forces that made the assembled pack whimper in confusion and awe. Her wolf took a step forward, then another. Each movement carried her closer to the most powerful predator in their world, the Alpha King whose dominance could crush her with a thought. Around them, the watching pack began to murmur prayers and threats in equal measure, unable to comprehend what they were witnessing. When she was close enough to touch the black wolf's massive form, close enough for him to end her defiance with devastating finality, her wolf stopped and sat down, not in submission, not in surrender, but with the calm dignity of an equal meeting an equal, silver eyes meeting gold without flinching or backing down. The Alpha King's wolf stared at her for a long moment that felt like eternity. Then, slowly, deliberately, it lowered its great head until they were eye to eye. The arena erupted in chaos. Shouts of outrage, cries of impossibility, desperate questions about what was happening filled the air. Pack members leapt to their feet, pointing and gesturing wildly at the scene unfolding in their sacred space. But in the centre of it all, two wolves sat in perfect stillness, surrounded by silver light from ancient stones and connected by bonds that defied every law their people understood. The Alpha King's wolf spoke without words, a rumble of sound that vibrated through the sacred stones and into Lyra's bones. Her wolf answered with a sound like silver bells, and the harmony between them made the very air shimmer with power. When the Alpha King finally shifted back to human form, his winter storm eyes were blazing with something between wonder and recognition. He looked down at Lyra's silver-grey wolf with an expression that made the watching crowd fall silent once more. "Guards," he said quietly, his voice carrying absolute authority, "clear the arena, now." As pack members began filing out in confused groups, muttering about impossible displays and broken protocols, the Alpha King remained standing in the sacred circle with Lyra's wolf. When they were alone except for the elders and pack leadership, he spoke again, his words carrying weight that seemed to shake the ancient stones themselves. "Shift back, we need to talk." Everything changed when the Alpha King's wolf bowed. It wasn't submission, Lyra realized with crystalline clarity, as she watched the massive black head lower in acknowledgement. It was recognition, ancient calling to ancient, power greeting power, a supernatural truth that made every conventional law seem suddenly fragile and insignificant. Her wolf remained sitting in perfect composure, silver fur gleaming in the light of the sacred stones as if she had been carved from starlight itself. Around them, the arena had erupted into chaos that bordered on pandemonium, voices raised in shock and disbelief at what they were witnessing. "This is impossible!" Beta Marcus shouted above the din, his face flushed with rage and confusion. "She's a servant. She's nothing. Her wolf is broken, defective. It cannot command respect from—" "Silence!" The Alpha King's voice cut through the noise like a blade through silk, carrying an authority that made every throat in the arena close involuntarily. Thane had shifted back to human form, but the supernatural pressure emanating from him was so intense that several pack members stumbled under its weight. He stood in the sacred circle, wearing only the shadows and starlight that clung to his skin, magnificent and terrible, and utterly focused on the silver-grey wolf that sat calmly before him. When he spoke again, his voice carried wonder threaded through with something deeper, something that made Lyra's heart skip against her ribs. "Guards," he commanded without taking his eyes off her wolf. "Clear the arena. Everyone except the elders." The evacuation was swift but reluctant, pack members casting backward glances as they filed toward the exits. Lyra caught sight of Cassandra's face in the crowd, twisted with fury and disbelief, her blue eyes promising retribution for this impossible upset of the natural order. But it was Elder Morgana's expression that made Lyra's breath catch. The ancient woman was staring at her with recognition that went deeper than surprise, her weathered features reflecting something that looked almost like relief, as if she had been waiting decades for this moment to finally arrive. When the arena was empty, except for the pack's leadership and the two figures in the sacred circle, Alpha King Thane approached Lyra's wolf with careful steps. His own wolf prowled just beneath his skin, visible as shadow and starlight, but it made no move to dominate or intimidate. Instead, it seemed to be offering greeting to an equal. "Shift back," Thane said quietly, his winter storm eyes never leaving her wolf's silver gaze. "We need to understand what just happened here." Lyra's wolf looked at him for a long moment, then slowly began the transformation back to human form. The change hurt less than usual, as if the sacred stones were somehow easing the process, lending their ancient power to make the shift smooth and natural. When she stood before him on two legs, someone threw a rough cloak over her shoulders. She pulled it close and tried to find her voice, tried to explain the inexplicable, but words seemed inadequate for what had just passed between their wolves. "I don't understand it either," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "My wolf has always been wrong somehow, different. It won't submit properly, won't show the respect that pack law demands. I've tried to make it behave, but it—" "Your wolf isn't wrong," Thane interrupted, and the certainty in his voice made her look up to meet his gaze directly. "My wolf recognizes yours, acknowledges it as an equal. That should be impossible unless—" He trailed off, studying her face with an intensity that made her feel exposed, as if he could see through flesh and bone to the secrets hidden in her very soul. Around them, the sacred stones continued their gentle silver humming, responding to forces that made the watching elders shift nervously. "Unless what?" Elder Morgana stepped forward, her ancient voice carefully neutral, but Lyra caught the undertone of tension threaded through the words. "Unless she carries royal blood," Thane said, and the statement fell into the arena like a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples of shock through everyone present. "Impossible!" Beta Marcus sputtered. "She's an orphan, a servant. Her lineage is unknown, but clearly common. There's nothing royal about—" "My wolf doesn't lie," Thane said, his voice carrying absolute finality. "It recognizes what it recognizes, and it has never been wrong about bloodlines or power." He turned back to Lyra, his gaze searching. "What do you know about your parents, your family history?" "Nothing," Lyra admitted, the word tasting like ash in her mouth. "I was found as an infant, alone and abandoned. The pack took me in out of charity, gave me work in exchange for shelter. I've always been told I'm nobody special, that my wolf strangeness is a sign of defective breeding." "You were told wrong." The voice belonged to Elder Morgana, and it carried a weight that made everyone in the arena turn to stare at her. The ancient woman approached the sacred circle with slow, deliberate steps, her eyes fixed on Lyra with an expression that seemed to see straight through time itself. "You know something." Thane's words were not a question, and the elder's slight nod confirmed what the supernatural tension in the air had already suggested. "I know many things," Morgana replied carefully, "including truths that have been buried for more than 20 years, secrets that were meant to protect but may have caused more harm than good." She stopped at the edge of the sacred circle, just outside the ring of glowing stones, her weathered hands clasped before her, like someone preparing to deliver judgment. When she spoke again, her voice carried the authority of someone who had witnessed the rise and fall of kingdoms. "Tell me, child," she said to Lyra, "do you remember anything from before you came to this pack? Any dreams, any fragments of memory that might speak to who you truly are?" Lyra shook her head, but even as she did, something stirred in the depths of her mind. Not quite memory, but the ghost of memory, shadows and whispers that had haunted her dreams since childhood. Images of silver light and gentle voices, of hands that held her with infinite care before everything went dark. "I dream sometimes," she admitted reluctantly, "about silver light and people I can't quite see, but they're just dreams. They don't mean anything." "Don't they?" Elder Morgana's smile was sad and knowing. "What if I told you that those dreams are memories? What if I told you that the silver light you remember is your mother's power, and the gentle voices belong to parents who loved you enough to sacrifice everything to keep you safe?" The words hit Lyra like physical blows, each one reshaping her understanding of herself and her place in the world. Around the arena, the sacred stones pulsed with increasingly bright light, as if they were responding to truths finally being spoken aloud. "What are you saying?" Thane's voice was dangerously quiet, power coiling beneath the surface like a storm preparing to break. Elder Morgana looked directly at him, her ancient eyes reflecting depths of knowledge and regret that spoke to decades of kept secrets. When she answered, her words changed everything. "I'm saying that this young woman is not the orphaned servant we pretended she was. I'm saying that the Alpha King's wolf recognizes her because she carries the blood of the Eastern Royal House, the lost dynasty that was supposedly extinguished 23 years ago." She paused, letting the impossible truth settle into the stunned silence. "I'm saying that Lyra is Princess Lyralee of the Eastern Kingdoms, the rightful heir to a throne that the world believes no longer exists." The arena fell into a silence so complete that Lyra could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. She stared at Elder Morgana, trying to process words that seemed to belong in someone else's story, trying to reconcile the image of a lost princess with the girl who had spent her life cleaning floors and hiding from attention. "That's impossible," she whispered, but even as she spoke her wolf was stirring with something that felt like recognition, like pieces of a puzzle finally clicking into place. "Is it?" Thane asked, his voice soft with wonder. "Is it impossible that my wolf would recognize royal blood, that the sacred stones would sing with power when you touch them? That you would dream of silver light and gentle voices that belong to parents who died trying to protect their only child?" The questions hung in the air like promises waiting to be fulfilled, and for the first time in her life, Lyra began to wonder if the story of who she was had been written in someone else's handwriting entirely. Her wolf sat quietly in her mind, no longer pacing or agitated, but calm with the satisfaction of truth finally being spoken. And in that calm, Lyra heard an echo of something she had been searching for all her life without knowing its name. Home, recognition, belonging, the knowledge that she was not and had never been nobody at all. The sacred grove bordered the eastern edge of the palace grounds, where ancient trees whispered secrets older than the stones beneath their roots. Thane had brought her here after the chaos of the arena, seeking a place where they could speak without the weight of watching eyes and political implications pressing down upon them. Lyra walked beside him in silence, her mind reeling with Elder Morgana's revelation, Princess Lyrelay of the Eastern Kingdoms. The words felt foreign on her tongue, like a name that belonged to someone else entirely. How could she be royalty when she had spent her life invisible, worthless, cleaning floors and hiding from attention? "You're thinking too loudly," Thane said quietly as they entered the grove's embrace. Ancient oaks rose around them like cathedral pillars, their branches forming a canopy that filtered the afternoon light into dancing patterns of gold and green. "I don't understand any of this," Lyra admitted, stopping beside a stream that wound through the grove's heart. The water sang over smooth stones, a sound that seemed to resonate with something deep in her bones. "Yesterday I was a servant. Today I'm supposedly a lost princess. How is that possible?" Thane studied her with those winter storm eyes, and she could feel his wolf's presence just beneath the surface, watching her with the same intense focus. When he spoke, his voice carried gentle certainty that made her chest tight with unfamiliar emotion. "You were always a princess," he said simply. "The only thing that changed today was everyone else finally seeing what was always there." Her wolf stirred at his words, lifting its head in her mind like it was agreeing with something it had known all along. The sensation was unsettling and comforting in equal measure, as if pieces of herself that had never quite fit were finally falling into place. "But I don't feel like a princess," she whispered, sinking down to sit beside the stream. "I feel like a fraud, like everyone is going to realize this is all a mistake and send me back to scrubbing floors where I belong." Thane lowered himself beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his skin. His wolf was completely calm now, no longer prowling but settled into contentment that spoke of finding something long sought. "Tell me about these dreams you mentioned," he said, his voice gentle but persistent. "The ones with silver light and voices you can't quite remember." Lyra closed her eyes, letting herself sink into memories she had spent years trying to forget. They always came at night, fragments of sensation and emotion that left her aching for something she couldn't name. "There's always singing," she said softly. "A woman's voice, warm and sweet, singing lullabies in a language I don't recognize, and hands that smell like moonflowers, braiding my hair and telling me I'm precious, that I'm loved beyond measure." The words came easier now, spilling out like water through a broken dam. "There's silver light everywhere, not harsh but gentle, like starlight made tangible. And safety. Such overwhelming safety, like nothing in the world could ever hurt me as long as those voices were there." "What happens to change that?" Thane asked quietly. "Darkness." The word came out harsh, edged with pain that she had carried for so long it felt like part of her bones. Suddenly the singing stops. The hands disappear. There's shouting and crying and the smell of smoke. Then nothing but cold and emptiness until someone finds me and brings me to the pack. Tears were sliding down her cheeks now, though she hadn't realized she was crying. Thane reached out slowly, telegraphing his movement like he was approaching a wounded animal, and gently brushed the moisture away with his thumb. "Those aren't just dreams," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "They're memories of your parents, of the night the Eastern Kingdoms fell and you lost everything that should have been yours by birthright." His touch sent sparks through her skin, warmth that seemed to flow directly to her wolf and settle there like coming home. She should have pulled away, should have maintained the distance that someone of her station owed to an Alpha King, but his gentleness undid her in ways that cruelty never could. "Elder Morgana says my parents died protecting me," she whispered. "But I don't remember their faces. I don't remember their names. What kind of daughter forgets her own parents?" The kind who was barely more than a baby when they were taken, Thane replied, his hand still cupping her cheek with infinite tenderness. The kind who survived because her parents' love was strong enough to hide her from those who would have killed her if they'd known what she truly was. The bond between them hummed like a plucked string, golden threads of connection that she could almost see shimmering in the grove's dappled light. Her wolf was purring now, a sound of contentment that vibrated through her entire being. "I can feel you," she said, wonder threading through her voice. "In my mind, in my chest, like there's a golden cord connecting us that gets stronger every time you're near." Thane's eyes darkened, and she caught a glimpse of his wolf moving restlessly beneath the surface. "The mate bond," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "My wolf recognized yours because we're destined partners, two halves of a whole that were always meant to find each other." The words should have terrified her, should have sent her fleeing back to the safety of invisibility and insignificance. Instead, they felt like the missing piece she had been searching for all her life without knowing what she sought. "But I'm nobody," she said, the old refrain falling from her lips like a prayer worn smooth by repetition. "Even if I am this lost princess, I don't know how to be royal. I don't know anything about ruling or politics or being worthy of someone like you." "You're wrong." Thane's voice carried absolute certainty, and his wolf rose closer to the surface, adding its own conviction to his words. "My wolf has never been wrong about worthiness. It wouldn't recognize you as an equal unless you carried the strength to stand beside me, to face whatever darkness threatens our territories." He shifted closer, his presence overwhelming in the best possible way. "You spent your life believing you were worthless because that was the only way to keep you safe, but your wolf always knew the truth. It refused to bow because royal wolves bow only to their equals or superiors." The stream sang its ancient song beside them, and the grove's magic seemed to wrap around them like a blessing. Here, in this sacred space where old power flowed like water through the very air, pretense became impossible. "I'm scared," Lyra admitted, the words barely audible above the water's melody. "What if I'm not strong enough for this? What if I disappoint everyone who's counting on me to be something I don't know how to be?" Thane's hand slid from her cheek to tangle in her hair, his touch gentle but possessive. "Then we'll figure it out together," he said simply. "That's what mates do. They face the impossible side by side and make it possible through sheer stubborn will." The mate bond flared between them, golden and warm and undeniably real. Her wolf stretched in contentment, finally at peace in a way she had never experienced. For the first time in her life, she felt truly seen, truly known, truly valued for exactly what she was, rather than what she lacked. "There's something else you need to know," Thane said, his voice growing serious. "If Elder Morgana is right about your identity, then there are people who will see you as a threat. The same forces that destroyed your parents' kingdom won't hesitate to finish what they started if they learn you survived." Fear lanced through the golden warmth, sharp and cold. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that revealing your true identity puts you in mortal danger," Thane replied, his eyes blazing with protective fire. "But hiding it means accepting a lie for the rest of your life, denying who you truly are and what you were meant to become." The choice stretched before her like a crossroads in a dark forest. Safety in shadows or truth in light, with no way to know which path would lead to survival. Her wolf made the decision for both of them, rising to its feet in her mind with regal dignity and absolute certainty. Royal blood demanded acknowledgement even in the face of mortal peril. "I can't keep pretending to be nobody," she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "Not now that I know the truth. Not when I can feel my parents' love still protecting me through these memories." Thane smiled, and the expression transformed his austere features into something luminous. "That's my mate," he said with fierce pride, ready to claim her birthright regardless of the cost. The golden bond between them blazed brighter, sealing a pact that would change the fate of kingdoms. In the sacred grove, where ancient magic flowed like water through sacred ground, a lost princess chose truth over safety, and an Alpha King chose love over political convenience. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The Pack Council convened at moonrise, with the grim solemnity of judges preparing to deliver sentence. Lyra had spent the remainder of the day in a guest chamber that felt more like a gilded prison, forbidden from leaving while the Pack's leadership debated her fate. Through the window she could see groups of Pack members gathering in hushed clusters, their voices carrying fragments of disbelief and speculation that made her stomach churn with dread. "Princess Lyra Lee," she whispered to her reflection in the polished glass, testing how the name felt on her tongue. It still seemed to belong to someone else, someone braver and stronger and more worthy of the title than a girl who had spent her life scrubbing floors. A sharp rap on the door interrupted her thoughts. "The council will see you now," called a guard whose voice carried the careful neutrality of someone trying not to take sides in a political nightmare. She followed him through corridors that seemed longer and more threatening than they had that morning, past Pack members who stared at her with expressions ranging from awe to suspicion to barely concealed hostility. By the time she reached the great hall where the council waited, her hands were trembling despite every effort to appear calm. The Pack's leadership had arranged themselves in a semicircle around the hall's centre, their faces grave with the weight of unprecedented decisions. Elder Morgana sat at their head, her ancient eyes reflecting depths of wisdom and regret. To her right sat Beta Marcus, his expression thunderous with barely contained fury. Other council members filled the remaining seats, their wolves prowling restlessly beneath the surface as supernatural tension filled the air. Alpha King Thane stood apart from the council, positioned where he could observe without appearing to influence their deliberations. When Lyra entered, his winter-storm eyes found hers immediately, offering silent strength that made her spine straighten with borrowed courage. "Lyra of the Crescent Moon Pack," Elder Morgana began, her voice carrying formal authority that echoed off the stone walls. "You stand before this council accused of making false claims to royal blood, of disrupting sacred ceremonies, and of attempting to deceive an Alpha King through supernatural fraud." The charges hit like physical blows, each one designed to strip away the fragile hope that had begun growing in her heart. She opened her mouth to protest, but Elder Morgana held up a weathered hand for silence. "However," the elder continued, "there are also those who believe your claims may be genuine, that the supernatural recognition witnessed in our sacred arena speaks to truths that have been hidden for more than 2 decades. Beta Marcus leaned forward, his face flushed with righteous anger. "Supernatural recognition can be faked by those skilled in dark magic," he declared. "Trickery designed to fool even the most powerful alphas into believing lies. This girl has lived among us as a servant for 20 years. If she carried royal blood, wouldn't we have sensed it? Wouldn't there have been signs?" "There were signs," Elder Morgana replied quietly. "A wolf that refused to submit, unusual reactions to sacred objects, dreams of silver light and royal ceremonies. We chose to ignore them, because acknowledging them would have meant facing truths we weren't ready to confront." The council murmured among themselves, voices rising in heated debate. Lyra caught fragments of argument from both sides, those who demanded proof of her claims and those who pointed to the Alpha King's wolf as evidence that couldn't be dismissed. "The sacred flames," announced Council Member Elena, her voice cutting through the discussion like a blade. "If she truly carries royal blood, let her prove it through trial by fire. The ancient flames burn away all deception, revealing truth in its purest form. If she emerges unharmed, her claims are genuine. If she burns—" The implication hung in the air like a death sentence. Trial by sacred fire was reserved for the most serious accusations of supernatural fraud, and few who entered the flames under suspicion lived to speak of what they found there. "You're suggesting we risk killing her to satisfy your doubts?" Thane's voice carried dangerous undertones, his wolf pressing closer to the surface with protective fury. "I'm suggesting we use the ancient laws to determine truth from lies," Elena replied coolly. "The flames don't lie, Alpha King. They cannot be fooled by trickery or manipulated by those who would deceive us. If she truly is Princess Lyralee, she has nothing to fear." Other council members began nodding, seizing on the suggestion with relief that bordered on eagerness. A trial by fire would resolve the impossible situation cleanly, one way or another. Either she would emerge vindicated, or the problem would solve itself through sacred justice. The trial would be conducted according to ancient protocols, Elder Morgana said, her voice heavy with reluctance. Sacred flames kindled with moonlight and fed with herbs that amplify supernatural truth. The accused must enter the fire circle willingly and remain until the flames reveal their true nature. Lyra felt the blood drain from her face as the reality of what they were proposing sank into her bones. They wanted her to step into magical fire that would burn away any deception, trusting that royal blood would protect her from incineration. If they were wrong about her identity, she would die in agony while the pack watched. "I won't allow this," Thane said, his voice carrying absolute authority. "The risk is too great, the precedent too dangerous. My wolf's recognition should be sufficient proof for any reasonable counsel." "With respect, Alpha King," Beta Marcus interjected, "your wolf's reaction could be explained by many things. Powerful magic, sophisticated deception, or simply wishful thinking on your part. The pack deserves certainty, not speculation based on supernatural instincts that may have been compromised." The accusation that his judgment might be clouded sent dangerous ripples through Thane's carefully controlled composure. His wolf snarled just beneath the surface, golden eyes blazing with fury at the suggestion that he could be so easily deceived. But before he could respond, Lyra found her voice. "I'll do it." The words fell into stunned silence, every eye in the hall turning to stare at her, with expressions ranging from shock to admiration to horror. Her own voice seemed to belong to someone else, someone braver and more certain than she felt. "I'll undergo the trial by fire," she continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "If it will prove my identity and put these doubts to rest, then I'll face whatever the flames reveal." "Lyra, no." Thane stepped forward, his face tight with protective fury. "This is madness. You don't have to prove anything to them. My recognition should be enough." She looked at him with gratitude that threatened to overflow into tears, but her resolve didn't waver. "I have to know for certain," she said quietly, "not just for them, but for myself. I need to know if the memories are real, if the dreams of silver light and loving voices belong to Princess Lyralee or to a servant girl who's been fooling herself with impossible fantasies." Her wolf stirred in her mind, rising to its feet with calm certainty that offered strength when her human courage faltered. Whatever she truly was, whatever blood flowed in her veins, her wolf was ready to face the truth. "Very well," Elder Morgana said, her voice heavy with reluctant respect. "The trial will be held at dawn, when the sacred flames burn brightest and deception finds no place to hide. If you survive with your true nature revealed, the pack will accept whatever the fire declares." As the council began discussing preparations and protocols, Lyra felt Thane's presence like warmth against her back. When she turned to meet his gaze, she saw pride mixed with terror in those winter storm eyes. "You don't have to do this alone," he said quietly, for her ears alone. "Whatever happens in those flames, my wolf will be watching. If anything goes wrong, if the fire threatens to consume you, I'll intervene regardless of ancient law or pack politics." The mate bond hummed between them, golden threads of connection that offered strength she hadn't known she possessed. Tomorrow she would discover whether she was a lost princess or a deluded servant girl. But tonight she had the support of the most powerful alpha in the known territories and a wolf that refused to doubt her worth. It would have to be enough. The sacred flames kindled with the first light of dawn, fed by moonflower petals and herbs that had grown in consecrated ground for 1,000 years. Lyra stood at the edge of the fire circle, watching silver-white flames dance against the morning sky with an otherworldly beauty that took her breath away. The entire pack had gathered to witness the trial, their faces reflecting mixtures of anticipation, fear, and morbid curiosity. Elder Morgana stood beside the flames with ancient words of power flowing from her lips, each syllable adding to the supernatural force building in the sacred space. "The fire of truth burns away all deception," the elder intoned, her voice carrying across the arena with ceremonial gravity. "Let those who enter speak only honesty, for lies cannot survive the sacred flame's embrace." Lyra felt her wolf stirring restlessly in her mind, not with fear, but with strange anticipation, as if it recognized something familiar in the silver-white fire. Around them, the sacred stones began their gentle humming, responding to forces that made the assembled pack shift nervously. "Last chance to withdraw," Beta Marcus called out, his voice carrying false concern that fooled no one. "Admit your deception now and face exile instead of death." She ignored him, focusing instead on Thane's presence like an anchor in the storm of her anxiety. The Alpha King stood at the trial circle's edge, his winter storm eyes blazing with protective fury and helpless terror. The mate bond between them hummed with golden warmth, offering strength that she wrapped around herself like armor. "I'm ready," Lyra announced, her voice carrying further than it should have in the morning air. Elder Morgana nodded solemnly and gestured toward the fire circle. "Step forward, child of unknown lineage. Let the sacred flames reveal what blood flows in your veins." Lyra took her first step into the circle and immediately felt the temperature change. Not the searing heat she had expected, but something warm and welcoming, like stepping into a bath prepared by loving hands. The flames rose higher around her, silver-white tongues of fire that seemed to dance in welcome rather than threat. The second step brought tingling sensations across her skin, as if invisible hands were examining every inch of her being. She heard gasps from the watching crowd as the flames began responding to her presence, their silver light intensifying until it rivaled the dawn sky. By her third step, the fire had completely enclosed her in a circle of luminous warmth. She could see the pack through the flames, their faces distorted by heat shimmer and supernatural power. But she felt no pain. If anything, the fire seemed to be welcoming her home. "Impossible!" someone whispered from the crowd. "The flames should be testing her by now. She should be screaming." Instead, Lyra felt the sacred fire beginning its true work, not burning, but peeling away layers of concealment that she hadn't even known existed. Magic that had wrapped around her since infancy began dissolving like mist before the sun, revealing truths that had been hidden for more than 20 years. The pain came suddenly and overwhelmingly, but not from the flames. It was the agony of suppressed power breaking free, of magical barriers shattering after decades of containment. Lyra cried out as energy blazed through her veins like liquid starlight, silver fire racing along pathways that had been blocked since childhood. Her wolf howled in her mind, not with pain but with fierce joy as its true nature finally emerged. The flames around her exploded upward in a pillar of silver-white light that could be seen for miles. Ancient power flowed through the fire and into her bones, royal magic that had been sleeping for 23 years, suddenly roaring to life with the force of a dam bursting. Her skin began to glow with inner light, silver radiance that pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat. Across her arms and shoulders, marks appeared that had been hidden by concealment spells since birth. Not scars or blemishes, but royal sigils that glowed like captured starlight, proclaiming her bloodline to anyone with eyes to see. "The marks of House Silvermoon," Elder Morgana breathed, her voice carrying shock and vindication in equal measure. I haven't seen those sigils in over 20 years. Lyra felt her wolf rising to the surface, but not in the painful transformation she had always known. This shift was smooth as silk, power flowing like water as her true form finally emerged. The wolf that stepped from her human skin was magnificent, larger than any pack wolf had a right to be, with fur that gleamed like molten silver and eyes that burned with golden fire. This was her true form, the royal wolf that had been hidden beneath layers of deception and carefully maintained weakness. She stood in the sacred flames without fear, silver light playing across her luminous fur as ancient magic recognized the royal blood that sang in her veins. The watching pack fell to their knees as one, overwhelmed by the supernatural presence radiating from the fire circle. Even Beta Marcus dropped his gaze, his wolf whimpering in recognition of power that dwarfed his own. But it was Thane's reaction that made her heart soar. The Alpha King's massive black wolf emerged with fluid grace, approaching the fire circle with reverence that bordered on worship. When he reached the flame's edge, he lowered his great head in acknowledgement of his true mate, his equal in power and birthright. The sacred fire began to subside, its work complete. As the flames died back to normal size, Lyra shifted to human form with ease that had never been possible before. The royal marks still glowed on her skin, silver sigils that proclaimed her identity to the assembled multitude. Princess Leeralee of House Silvermoon, Elder Morgana announced, her voice carrying across the arena with finality that brooked no argument. Rightful heir to the Eastern Kingdoms, daughter of King Uldric and Queen Seraphina, lost royal child who has come home at last. The revelation sent shockwaves through the crowd. Whispers of awe and terror rippled through the pack as they realized they had witnessed the return of a bloodline thought lost forever. House Silvermoon had been the most powerful royal family in the Eastern Territories, their silver wolves legendary for their strength and magical abilities. Lyra stood in the dying flames, her skin still glowing with residual power, and finally understood why her wolf had never bowed to anyone. Royal wolves submitted only to their equals or superiors, and in the Crescent Moon pack there had been none worthy of such recognition. Until now. Thane approached the fire circle, shifting back to human form as he crossed the threshold. The sacred flames parted for him like water, recognizing his right to stand beside his mate. When he reached her, he took her hands in his touch sending sparks of golden warmth through the mate bond. "My queen," he said simply, his voice carrying reverence and love and fierce pride in equal measure. Around them, the pack slowly rose from their knees, their faces reflecting a mixture of awe and adjustment to this new reality. The servant girl who had cleaned their floors was gone forever, replaced by a princess whose power blazed like captured starlight. But as Lyra looked out at the assembled crowd, she saw more than wonder in their expressions. In some faces she glimpsed fear, in others calculation. The revelation of her true identity had solved one mystery, but it had created new problems that would demand careful navigation. She was no longer invisible, no longer safe in the shadows. She was Princess Leeralee of House Silvermoon, and there were those in the world who would kill to keep the Eastern Kingdom's royal line buried forever. The sacred flames died to embers around her feet, their truth-telling work complete. But the real challenges were just beginning. The sacred flames had barely died to embers when Elder Morgana approached with steps that seemed to carry the weight of decades. Her ancient eyes reflected depths of knowledge and regret that spoke to secrets finally ready to be unveiled, truths that had been buried so long they had nearly become myths. "Come," she said to Lyra, her voice gentle but weighted with ceremony. "It is time you learned the full truth of what you are and what was sacrificed to keep you alive." The pack began to disperse, their whispered conversations carrying fragments of awe and speculation, but Lyra barely noticed their departure. The royal marks still glowed faintly on her skin, silver sigils that pulsed with each heartbeat like a second pulse, and her wolf stretched contentedly in her mind with the satisfaction of truth finally acknowledged. Elder Morgana led them to the sacred grove where ancient trees whispered secrets older than kingdoms. Here, surrounded by power that predated human civilization, she began the story that Lyra had waited her entire life to hear. Your parents were King Aldrich and Queen Seraphina of the Eastern Kingdoms, Morgana began, her weathered hands clasped before her like someone preparing to deliver both gift and burden. House Silvermoon was the most powerful royal bloodline in the Eastern Territories, blessed with silver wolves whose magic could heal the land itself and command the loyalty of all supernatural creatures. Lyra sank onto a moss-covered stone, her legs suddenly unable to support her weight, as fragments of memory began stirring. Silver light, gentle voices, hands that smelled of moonflowers. The dreams that had haunted her sleep were coalescing into something real and heartbreaking. They ruled with wisdom and compassion, Morgana continued, her voice taking on the cadence of ancient storytelling. The Eastern Kingdoms flourished under their guidance, becoming a sanctuary for supernatural beings fleeing persecution in other territories. But such prosperity attracted dangerous attention. Thane moved to stand behind Lyra, his presence offering strength and warmth as the elder's words painted pictures of a world she had been born to inherit but never known. Lord Malachar of the Shadow Territories coveted your parents' lands and power, Morgana said, her voice hardening with old anger. He gathered allies among those who feared House Silvermoon's influence, convincing them that silver wolves posed a threat to the natural order of pack hierarchy. The name Malachar sent ice through Lyra's veins, though she couldn't explain why. Her wolf growled low in her mind, hackles rising at some instinctive recognition of ancient enemy. The attack came on the winter solstice, when your parents' guard was focused on the holy ceremonies, Morgana continued, each word falling like stones into still water. Malachar's forces struck at dawn, overwhelming the palace defences with sheer numbers and dark magic that turned the kingdom's protective wards against itself. Lyra could see it now, fragments of memory breaking free from whatever magic had locked them away. Fire and smoke, screaming voices, the acrid smell of dark magic burning through air that had once been pure and safe. Your father fought like a demon to protect his people, Morgana said, tears sliding down her weathered cheeks. His silver wolf was magnificent in battle, cutting through enemy forces like starlight made flesh, but they were outnumbered, and Malachar had brought weapons specifically designed to kill silver wolves. How? Thane asked quietly, his voice tight with protective fury. Iron blessed with shadow magic, Morgana replied, her words barely above a whisper. Arrows and blades that could pierce even royal hide, enchanted to seek silver wolves specifically and ignore all others. Your father fell defending the throne room, buying precious moments for your mother to escape with you. The memory hit Lyra like a physical blow, silver lights suddenly dimming, a woman's voice calling her name with desperate love, hands lifting her with infinite tenderness, even as chaos erupted around them. Queen Seraphina was the most powerful silver wolf in 3 generations, Morgana continued, her voice thick with admiration and grief. She could have fought, could have unleashed magic that would have levelled Malachar's entire army. Instead, she chose to save you. What did she do? Lyra whispered, though part of her already knew the answer would break her heart. She gave her life to cast the greatest concealment spell ever attempted, Morgana replied. She wrapped you in her own silver light, layered protection around protection, until your royal nature was completely hidden from any supernatural sense. Then she used her dying breath to transport you hundreds of miles away, to a place where Malachar would never think to look. The grove fell silent, except for the whisper of wind through ancient leaves. Lyra felt tears streaming down her face as the full magnitude of her parents' sacrifice finally became clear. They had chosen her survival over their own lives, over their kingdom, over everything they had built together. But the spell came with a cost, Morgana continued gently. To hide your true nature so completely, your mother had to suppress not just your royal marks, but your wolf's full power. She knew that as you grew older, the concealment would become harder to maintain, that eventually your true self would fight to emerge. "That's why my wolf was always wrong," Lyra said, understanding flooding through her like dawn breaking. "Why it wouldn't submit, why it seemed defective. It was trying to break free of the concealment magic." "Exactly." Morgana's smile was sad but proud. "Your mother's spell was designed to weaken gradually over time, allowing your power to emerge slowly so it wouldn't kill you with the sudden release. But she never expected you to encounter another royal wolf before the concealment broke naturally." Thane's hand settled on her shoulder, warm and steady. "My wolf's recognition accelerated the process," he said with quiet certainty. Ancient calling to ancient, breaking down the barriers faster than they were meant to fall. "The sacred flames simply completed what was already beginning," Morgana confirmed. "They burned away the last traces of concealment magic and revealed what your parents died to protect." Lyra looked down at her hands, where the royal sigils still gleamed with faint silver light. House Silvermoon's marks, proclaiming her bloodline to anyone with the knowledge to read them. She was no longer invisible, no longer nobody. She was the last surviving member of a royal house that had been thought extinct. "What happened to Malachar?" she asked, though she feared the answer. "He claimed the eastern kingdoms as conquered territory," Morgana replied, her voice hardening with old fury. "Declared himself Lord Protector and ruled through fear and dark magic. But he never stopped looking for you, never stopped believing that somewhere in the world a silver wolf child had survived his purge." "And now that the concealment is broken?" Thane asked, his protective instincts blazing in his winter storm eyes. "Now he'll sense the awakening of silver wolf magic," Morgana said grimly. The sacred flames that revealed her identity sent out a supernatural pulse that every skilled magic user within 1,000 miles would have felt. If Malachar is still alive, he knows that Princess Leralee has returned. The implications settled over them like a shadow despite the grove's golden morning light. Lyra's revelation had solved the mystery of her identity, but it had also painted a target on her back that could be seen from the darkest corners of the supernatural world. "He'll come for me," she said quietly, the certainty settling into her bones like cold stone. "Let him come," Thane said, his voice carrying deadly promise. "He'll find that the last silver wolf is no longer alone and defenseless. She has a mate who will burn the world before allowing harm to touch her." The mate bond flared between them, golden warmth that pushed back the shadows of fear and uncertainty. Lyra reached up to cover his hand with hers, drawing strength from the connection that had already survived impossible recognition and supernatural trial. "My parents gave everything to keep me alive," she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "I won't let their sacrifice be meaningless. If Malachar wants to finish what he started, he'll discover that Princess Leralee is not the helpless infant he failed to kill 23 years ago." Her wolf rose in her mind, silver and proud and blazing with power that had been locked away too long. Whatever came next, whatever enemies emerged from the shadows of the past, she would face them as her parents' daughter, as the rightful heir to House Silvermoon, as a silver wolf who had finally learned to claim her birthright.